Hi, I am Linda Rice, your regional captain for Convention of States, Texas. I cover 5 Senate districts in Texas, 3 in South Texas and 2 in North Texas. And it is my job to find district captains for every House district in my regions, and also to welcome new supporters, to communicate with them, to give information of all sorts to you. And I have been wanting to do a video for quite some time, simply because the areas I cover are pretty broad. Like I said, all of South Texas and a couple areas in North Texas, pretty large areas in North Texas. And unfortunately, now we are in the middle of a global crisis, and a crisis also for our democracy and for our republic and our Constitution. So this has given me a very timely opportunity to do this video. And I'm on Zoom, the first time I've ever been doing it. And so I'm going to go today just over a small portion of the Constitution. I'm actually going to do a few short videos rather than one long one. So today I'm going to see if I can do what I want to do and click on share, click on the Constitution that I have, the presentation that I have, and I hope this is going like I expect it to. If this is all going well, you should be seeing We the People in front of you. So taking a look, as we start now our presentation, taking a look at those things that are in the preamble to the Constitution. Justice, a better union, a more perfect union, justice, domestic tranquility, common defense, general well-being, and the blessings of liberty are all in the preamble of the Constitution. This gives us a look at what the founders were seeking to accomplish in the Constitution. So this is really the, I guess you'd call it a thesis of the Constitution. And then if we go on to the next slide, we're going to see our 3 branches of government, which I know you all know, executive, legislative, executive, and judicial, in order that they appear Articles 1, 2, and 3 in the Constitution. I think the thing that will probably surprise you the most in this short video is how much power is granted to the legislative branch and how little power granted to the other 2, especially to the executive. And that's not what we really see these days. So there is Capitol Hill. That is where your representatives that go to DC do their business. And so let's take a look at the powers that the Constitution has given the legislative branch and the Congress in DC. First of all, financial powers given to Congress. They are to lay and collect taxes and tariffs. They are permitted to borrow money, which they do all the time. They are permitted to coin money. So if you were to read the Constitution, you would not see these in this order, but I've gathered them sort of in the order that they, under categories. So it'll be easier for us to look at. So 3 financial powers granted to Congress in the Constitution. And the next slide shows you the regulatory powers of Congress. They are permitted to regulate commerce with foreign nations, and it said the native tribes. Establish a uniform rule of naturalization and laws on bankruptcy. Provide for punishment of counterfeiters, establish post offices and roads, create patents or approve patents, create courts inferior to the Supreme Court. And that would be what is today our federal judiciary, those appellate courts, those that are under the Supreme Court. That court system was created in 1787 by the Judiciary Act. Protective powers of Congress. They are to provide for the common defense and general well-being, to organize arm, discipline the militia, and call forth the militia. To make rules for the government and the regulation of the land and naval forces. To raise and support armies, provide and maintain a navy, to declare war. That doesn't happen very often. Usually we just have activity without a declaration from Congress. And if I'm not mistaken, the last time that a war was actually declared was World War II. And I think I'm correct on that. I don't believe we've had a declaration of war since after that. To define and punish felonies on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations, and to make rules concerning captures. So those are the protective powers of Congress. You'll be interested to know what's not there, but I guess I'm not going to editorialize on that. I'm just going to let you think about what's not there. So I'm going to go back a couple of screens and look at 3 financial powers: taxes and borrowing and coining money, regulating the regulatory powers of Congress, and then protective powers of Congress. Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on this screen, and 5 of them deal with actual physically protecting our nation, and then there are felonies on the high seas to protect our people on the high seas, and then to make rules about captures. And then the last item under legislative powers is to make all laws necessary and proper for carrying into execution the previous powers. So if they're making laws that you haven't just seen in the first 3 slides I showed you, then they're out of bounds. And that's what we call at Convention of States federal overreach. All right, let's take a look at powers forbid Congress. One is about admitting migrants or immigrants, but that expired in 1808. Congress may not suspend habeas corpus. They may not pass a bill of attainder. And a bill of attainder is a declaration of guilt by a legislative body. And that is impossible because you are required to have a jury to be found guilty. They are not allowed to issue a head tax or a direct tax. When the income tax amendment was passed, many people thought that the Supreme Court would consider it unconstitutional because it is a direct tax on your income. And they may not draw from the Treasury without an appropriation bill. And we know how much they love to sign appropriation bills. Okay, let's take a look at the second branch of your government. It is the executive branch, the president's residence, the White House. Let's take a look at all the powers that a president has. He is commander-in-chief, as we know. The president can make treaties, but not without the advice and consent of the Senate. He can nominate ambassadors, ministers, and consuls and judges, and of course, not without the consent of the Senate. He can fill up vacancies during the Senate recess. He can reprieve and pardon people's sentences, and he can veto legislation that Congress has passed. And let's look at the next slide. Oh, look at that. That's all the president's powers. Just take a look at that and just let this sink in. In your Constitution, the United States Constitution, your founding fathers felt that these powers were the only ones that they wanted to delegate to the president. And we just want you to just let that sink in, how many things the president does that are not on this screen in front of you. And think of the previous screens, there were, I believe, 18 powers of Congress. So without comment about how many things the president does that are not on this screen, let's just go on and take a look at the judicial branch. This is the Supreme Court building in Washington. The powers of the Supreme Court are to judge in all cases in law and equity that arise under the Constitution and treaties of the U.S. made under their authority. So all cases in law and equity arising under the Constitution, the law, and the laws and treaties of the U.S. So if Congress passes a law, the Supreme Court has a right to declare it constitutional or unconstitutional. And what they're supposed to do is look at the Constitution to make that decision. In fact, what the Supreme Court and the federal courts often do is they look at what some other judge ruled as opposed to what the Constitution says. So that happens all the time. And I think, if I'm correct, that the logbook of cases that the Supreme Court goes by is about 3,000 pages long, whereas the US Constitution is less than 3,000 words long. So cases in law and equity arising under the Constitution. All cases of admiralty and maritime justice, they are allowed to rule on. The Supreme Court is allowed to rule on controversies to which the US is a party. That would mean if another country sues the United States or if a citizen sues the United States. Controversies between two or more states or citizens of different states. So if Louisiana sues Texas or Texas sues Louisiana, the Supreme Court has the power to decide that. If a citizen of Texas sued a citizen of Louisiana, the Supreme Court would have power to rule over that. And then controversies between citizens of the United States and another nation. If I were to sue France, for example, then the Supreme Court, I guess, would be involved in that. And the next slide then says that in all cases affecting ambassadors, public ministers, and consuls in states, the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. So if you'll take a look at that, ambassadors, public ministers, consuls, and states, Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. In all other cases, the Supreme Court is a court of appeal. In other words, if somebody doesn't like the decision of a lower court, it is worked up through the system. However, the Supreme Court does not have the power to rule on anything that occurs within a state. However, the Supreme Court does that all the time. Things go up through the system and they simply, nobody checks their power. It is said that the president can check the Congress. Any law that the Congress passes, the president can check it by his veto. And the legislative branch can check the president by overriding his veto. But who checks the Supreme Court? And the answer is, so far, no one. And Convention of States would like to lead the way, is leading the way in calling for a convention of states which would rectify this issue by proposing amendments that could clarify how SCOTUS Supreme Court is checked. And let's take a look then at Article 5 of the Constitution. Article 5 of the Constitution is where Convention of States gets its authority to call for a Convention of States. The 27 amendments that have been proposed, that have been passed through the years and are in our Constitution today. The first 10 amendments, of course, the Bill of Rights, and then the other 17 were all proposed by Congress. However, let's take a look at what Article 5 of the Constitution says. It says the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, and that's what we want to look at, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call, not can call, shall call a convention for proposing amendments. So like I said, 27 amendments, all proposed by Congress. However, if 2/3 of the states, which in this case is 34 out of 50, if 2/3 of the states apply for a convention of states on a particular issue, not on all and any issues, but on particular issues, if they apply, Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments. And those amendments are going to be proposed at a convention. So the amendments are not proposed before the convention, the amendments are proposed at the convention. And then the second part of Article 5 says, and I'm just going to read the highlighted things, and when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the states, or 38 states, or the conventions in 3/4 of the states, they will be valid as a part of this Constitution. All right, so let's just go back once more and take a look at that. The Constitution gives the states the right to gather for a convention to propose amendments if 2/3 of the states agree. And that, as I said, would be 34 in our system today with 50 states. And then the highlighted portion, if 38 states ratify the proposals that come out of the Constitution, the amendments, sorry, that come out of the convention, then they will be amendments to the Constitution. So this is where Convention of States gets its authority through Article 5 of the Constitution. We are a constitutional people. I was reminded recently of a story in the Bible where Joshua is crying out to the Lord because they didn't defeat their enemies. And he all of a sudden sees this huge person, which I'm not sure if it was Messiah or if it was an angel, if it was the Lord or if it was an angel. But he says to this entity, an angel or the Lord, "Are you for us or against us?" And the angel answered, "Neither one. I'm for the Lord." And so, though most of us at Convention of States are conservatives, and we're definitely constitutionalists, people ask, "Are you Democrat or Republican?" And our answer would be just like Joshua, neither one. We're constitutionalists. So we are not a political entity, but we do political things. Let's take a look at the next slide. That is the Bill of Rights. And actually today, I'm going to stop the video and I'm going to come back in a few days, weeks. I'm going to just talk to you about the Bill of Rights, and we're going to look at that, and then we're going to look at a few of the sections of the Texas Bill of Rights too. Everyone has become very curious about our constitutional rights in this Corona season. So I would like to come back at some point in time, very shortly, and present to you a good look at the Bill of Rights. And so for today, this is me signing off, and I thank you for listening. You have a blessed day.